Hello, everyone. I'd just like to introduce myself to those of you who do not know who I am. I'm Tina Fougere, President and Founder of the Canadian National Autism Foundation. And today we're going to interview a good friend of mine, Robert Tudisco. He's a nationally recognized author, a motivational speaker, and nonprofit management consultant. He also works for the law firm of Barger and Gaines in New York. Robert's been a friend for a while. He also advocates very strongly for people with special needs to make sure that they get the education that they need, that the parents get the help that they need. He used to be the Commissioner of Disability Rights, and he's also been the executive of the ADHD Executive Functioning Impairments for EDGE Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization. So for those of you who are watching and would like to ask some questions, Robert would be more than happy to answer some of those questions that you might have. So we will be waiting for Robert to come into this conversation, and it will take a little bit of time because of the time lapse from the US to Canada. There's a little bit of a lag there. So this interview, Robert's received his Juris Doctor at the Fordham University School, and I'm going to bring Robert on camera now. And Robert, what he does at the law firm. Robert, I'm bringing you in on camera. Robert can help those of you that might have some issues with bullying online, with your loved one, with any issues with the school that you might have, as well as any information that you'd like to know about special needs and how it would work with the legal system. That's what their firm does. It helps with everything and anything that anybody would like to know. So it's trying to add Robert in. Robert, it's trying to bring you on camera. It's adding you. So we'll give this a couple seconds and see if it brings Robert on. Okay, it's not bringing my guest on. It's not allowing me to bring him on. Okay, so let's see if we can try and bring Robert on again. Okay, trying to bring you on, Robert. For some reason, it's not bringing you in on camera. I'm going to add you again. Can't bring Robert. Robert, it's saying I can't bring you in on camera. Add. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not bringing you in, Robert. Can you send a request, Robert, to be added in on this? Never had this happen before. Let's see if I can add you again. Robert, can you send an invite to be brought in on camera? I see that you're watching and I'm trying to bring you in. I did send you an invite as well. And I'm not sure why it's not bringing you in. Okay. I'm not understanding this. Okay, this is not good. It's not allowing me to bring him in. Let's try this and see if this works now. Okay, Robert, there we go. Okay, it's trying to add you now, Robert. Again. I'm not sure if there's something going on with the bandwidth or with the internet, if there's an interruption from Canada to US. Okay. Well, we're saying this until we can get Robert on. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask your questions, type them in as we're doing this live feed. Robert, it's still trying to bring you in. Okay, it's connecting. Oh, finally. Okay, got you here, Robert. These electronics and their technical difficulties. Robert, are you still there? Robert, you froze. I'm not sure what happened there, but you froze, Robert. Okay, this isn't good. We finally get you on and now it's froze. Robert, can you at least hear me? Okay. Here we go again. So again, let me just tell you a little bit more about Robert. Robert's an avid runner. He's a sports philanthropist. He's a 9-time marathon finisher. He has developed a number of programs to raise funding and awareness for disability organizations such as CHAD and the EDGE Foundation. As the executive director of the EDGE Foundation. Okay, try this again, Robert. Let me see if I can accept you. I will approve you again. He created Team Edge as a means to promote a healthier way of life as well. Hi, Robert.
Hi, how are you?
I'm
Sorry
okay.
for the technical problems.
Hey, that's what happens with technology, eh? So I was just introducing myself to people and telling them a little bit about yourself. I didn't tell them everything because there's an awful lot to tell about you and everything you've done in your personal life and in your legal life. So, Robert, how about if you tell people exactly what you do at the law firm?
Sure. Well, essentially, Barger Gaines is the law firm, and all we do is represent students with disabilities, getting them services at school, IEPs, individualized education programs in the U.S. We go to team meetings with parents and help them advocate for themselves. We also do a number of educational programs for parents and also at some schools to get the administration and the parents to understand the advocacy process and to understand their children's disabilities even better. My particular field of expertise is in addressing issues with children with disabilities and when they get into trouble in school, disciplinary issues. My background is in law enforcement. I was a prosecutor early on in my career and a criminal defense attorney until about 22 years ago. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it really changed my whole mindset about my clients and representing people with disabilities because they are often extremely misunderstood.
So, Robert, let me ask you this.
Is there a difference for you? Obviously, you deal with other disabilities. If there's a lot of disciplinary reports put in, do you find it a struggle with dealing with somebody that's on the autism spectrum, somebody that has ADD, or somebody that has ADHD, or is it dealing with them all the same way?
Well, the process is the same. The issues that I find are that children on the spectrum typically will have a lot more developmental needs. And so the schools typically, especially if they're nonverbal, and it's not a big reach to get the schools to understand their need for services, etc. I think higher functioning students on the spectrum who have social skills problems, kids with Asperger's, are tougher, especially because they are extremely intelligent. And that is where the school typically has a disconnect. If they're so intelligent, why do they need services? And that's also a problem with kids with ADHD because kids can be hyperactive or inattentive or a combined type of ADHD. But the most challenging kids to get services for are the inattentive types. And the reason is because everybody can see the child who is hyperactive and bouncing off the walls. And often the teachers will want to do something to maintain order. They will speak to the parents about, getting an evaluation or something like that. The child who's sitting in the back of the room staring out the window, okay, is just labeled as lazy. And those are the toughest kids to get services for because they're passing and they're not failing out of school. They are not developmentally disabled in the sense that they can't speak or have communication issues, but there really are a lot of problems in terms of, in my opinion, um, the impulse control issue is really the behavioral culprit. I think that is where a lot of these kids run afoul of the school administration.
Okay, so let's just say, you know, a child has a dual diagnosis and is doing really good in school, but has behavioral reports put against them. And the school doesn't want to get any extra services in for the student because they are doing really good, they're not failing. What would you suggest for the parents to do?
Well, there's a number of things that parents can do and should do. First of all, the law in the United States is that there's a lot more to being a student than their grades on their report card. Okay, but I will tell parents that even if your student is a straight A student, okay, they are twice exceptional or something like that. If they get into disciplinary trouble and you find yourself in a meeting with the school principal or the superintendent, the first thing that they will tell you is there's a lot more than being a student here than their grades on their report card. They have to honor the student code of conduct, etc. And what I often will tell parents is that you should pull out the code of conduct for your school district and familiarize yourself with it. You would be shocked at the amount of things that are used to evaluate your child that have nothing to do with academics. They're supposed to be prompt and respectful and respect other people's property and a whole host of open-ended terms that are textbook for a student that's either autistic or ADHD. The inability to follow rules, the difficulty with impulsivity, a lot of those problems, these kids will fall into these traps. And what I tell parents when they're going into a meeting, for instance, is the unfortunate thing is that no parent pulls out the code of conduct and reads it unless the kid gets suspended, unless it's too late, okay? So you really have to be proactive and familiarize yourself with it. And second of all, what you can do is pull out report cards, okay? Report cards typically have a column where there's a grade. And then there's a column with comments. that says things like, he's a bright student, but he can't shut his mouth. He talks out of turn. He has difficulty socializing with the other kids. He is loose with his hands and doesn't understand you can't touch or hit or push another kid. All of those comments are crucial for parents to get services, because my argument would be that first, if you look at the code of conduct, my child typically does not conform to this, and I've got all of these comments in the report card to show it, but your teachers are evaluating him as having a number of issues that are inhibiting his being a student at the school. He's a bright kid, but he never does his homework, or things like that. And that is where you have to focus on trying to get support and services at the school.
But if that is happening as a parent of a special needs son, why wouldn't the school in the first place, if they see those struggles and they are writing them in the report card, why wouldn't they have a meeting with the parents in the first place to let them know?
Some teachers will. And some teachers will say, I think, and you also have to understand that teachers are reluctant to appear as if they're trying to diagnose a child. And it can be a touchy subject with some parents. But teachers are not the problem. In my opinion, unless you get, and it's rare, an old-fashioned teacher who's very closed-minded, etc. For the most part, teachers want to be able to teach all the kids in their classroom. And if there is an issue with behavior or something else, they will raise it. The problem is that, I hate to say this, but it boils down to dollars and cents. Special education services cost money, and the school has a fixed budget for these services that has to go around to all of these children. And if a student is passing, then number one, there is a reluctance to believe that there's a disability. And the second part of this is that if a student is passing, the typical traditional stigma is it's just a lazy kid, or it's a kid who's looking for attention and they are just, can't conform to the rules. They're a lazy underachiever. I have to tell you, growing up with undiagnosed ADHD in the 70s, okay, they didn't call it ADD. They called it BAD. If you were not conforming, you were a bad kid. And nobody understood at the time. Nobody looked past these things. And I don't know if I would necessarily say I was a bad kid, but I was spectacularly obnoxious as a child, okay? And I was very loud, and it was very difficult for the teachers to understand what was going on. We know a lot more now about brain function and how it impacts behavior and academics and other things. Another issue is a lot of these kids are what I am, in the sense that they are kinesthetic processors. They need to move their bodies in order to think. If you try to sit these kids still, a lot of times I've seen functional MRIs where portions of their brain will just shut down, okay? That is part of the process, understanding what type of learner this child is. And unfortunately, parents have to be very careful to raise these issues, request evaluations, evaluate privately if it's necessary, and really bring this information to the attention of the school. There's one other issue I will mention really quickly, and that is that having a disability like ADHD or autism or a learning disability doesn't necessarily, in the United States, guarantee you services. You still have to show how that disability is impacting their major life activity, which is being in school, and the way they interact with the other kids in the lunchroom or outside in the schoolyard is just as significant as how they interact with kids and the teachers in class.
Yep.
So that's why that's very significant for parents to understand.
Okay, so, and it's the same way here. Just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean that you're going to get the extra help or even an educational assistant to help you in the schools. What you have to do is you have to prove two things. Your child's a flight risk and your child's a danger. Unfortunately, in the last 5 years, that's changed, maybe 6 years. You have to prove that there is a need for your child to have that extra help. Mind you, you can get an IEP and they'll try and help with modifying your program, but that's the thing right there. You can have a modified program. Who's going to implement it if you don't have that extra help to sit there and work with your loved one in the school system?
That's an important issue that you bring up, Tina, and that is that most of the parents that I interact with or that I do trainings for, they envision the big fight or the big issue is to get the IEP and get the services, but implementation is crucial. Okay, parents have to be ever vigilant for two reasons. Number one, even if the school agrees to give you what you're requesting, you can't just breathe a sigh of relief, because that may not be what your child needs next year, or in 6 months, their needs may change. Also, in terms of implementation, if your child needs, for instance, a behavioral therapist, the school may say something like, well, our behavioral therapist left to go to another district and we're interviewing people. That could take a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months that your child goes without services, okay? It's very important. In the United States, parents are guaranteed to have at least one meeting with the team per year, an annual review meeting. But that doesn't mean that's all you get. If there is an issue, parents need to request a meeting and sit down and get the team together to really, look at what's going on here in a practical sense. And that's very important. You have to constantly be vigilant.
Well, it's like with the IEP as well. Okay, any IEP, when a parent gets an IEP for their child in school, they think, great, there's an IEP done for my child, and there's an IPRC done for my child, so that's great. You know what? Now we got things set in place. That's not always the case. As a parent, you have to really look at what is in that IEP and make sure that it does match what your child needs, and you have to keep reviewing that. You have to check on the work that's being done, what's being brought home. If there's any concerns, you phone the school and you ask if you can have an appointment with the teacher and speak to the teacher. Now with me, because there were so many issues with my son back when he started school, there was no such thing as them being inclusive in a classroom. So my advocating wasn't what you would call advocating. I was fighting, literally fighting. I went to the government to the point where they had to set up shop from Toronto in Hamilton, because I was fighting so much to get him inclusive, get an IEP, and get all the modifications that was needed. I had to fight for that. So, I went to the media. I went to the school board. I went on the news. Unfortunately, I didn't get to enjoy any of those early days of my son being in school because I was too busy advocating for him to get him the services that were rightfully his as a student to be able to have an education. That is his God-given right to have an education, and they would fight me on it because the principal would tell me, Mrs. Fougere, come on, your son needs to go where he belongs. And I says, he is where he belongs. He's in his neighborhood school, and that is his right to be in his neighborhood school with his twin sister. Robert, I fought for 3 years. I didn't give up, but it got to the point where my fighting, the school board ended up asking me to help them with advocating for parents. And then they asked me to help them write an autism book that went into every school. And see, that's the point. If you know your rights as a parent and you keep fighting for those rights for your child, don't give up. They will eventually listen. Unfortunately, it takes time, but they will listen.
You're 100% correct. And after doing this for so many years, I've come to the conclusion that, and I think I've said this to you before, the most powerful force in the universe is a mom on a mission. Yep. And there is no substitute for that. The one thing that I would encourage you, and it can be really challenging when it comes to an autistic child, and that is that most parents, when they learn about a disability, a learning disability or ADHD or something, will, research it and they will learn about it to a certain degree. But very few parents sit down and talk to their child about what's frustrating you and to really understand from their child's perspective what it's like. Because as a parent, it is natural to feel your own frustration, no matter how much you love your child, that things are not getting done, or there are behavioral reports coming home, or why can't you just do what you're supposed to? But what you don't see is the self-torture that goes on behind our eyes.
Yeah.
And what you don't see is the impact that these disabilities have on our sense of self-esteem. And to really understand why your child is struggling from their perspective helps two ways. Number one, it'll make you a much more effective advocate for them. Number two, you will be helping your child be prepared to advocate for themselves in the future. And in the United States, when they graduate from high school, the legal burden shifts. Up to 12th grade, they are required, the school district is responsible and has a legal burden to identify children with disabilities and provide appropriate services for them. When you graduate from high school and go on to post-secondary, that burden now shifts. It's the student's obligation to self-report their disability and request services and support at college. And a lot of students are unable to do it because the parents have been doing all of the advocacy traditionally. And second of all, a lot of these kids are reluctant to do it because when they go off to college, they just want to fit in. They don't want to label themselves as a disabled student.
Yeah.
So it's very important that you learn about your child's disability from their perspective so you can help them and you can help them stand up for themselves at some point in time.
And you know what? That's true, because we've run into quite a few that are in university and college, and the struggle is real. And a lot of them didn't understand, including the parents didn't understand, that even though you're in university and college, you can still get the same help that you did in high school and in public school. You can ask for that extra help from whether it be somebody on the school board or whether it be somebody in a higher grade that can help you with modifying that program for you. The help is still there, but they also need to have that diagnosis or assigned form in the OSR file so that it proves that you can get that extra help. But a lot of parents don't know that, and a lot of students don't know that, and we've had to help quite a few and let them know that, they're telling us that, they're going to bow out of university or college. Or why? Well, because I can't do it. It's too hard for me. I don't have the help that I had when I was in public school and in high school. But yes, you do. All you have to do is go meet with the guidance counselor and set it up with the program department that they can get you that extra help. But parents aren't told that and students aren't told that. They think when you're finished high school that those services stop. They never stop. They're there as long as it's needed, but you have to bring it to their attention to let them know.
Yeah, that's an important point. In the United States, for instance, I don't know if you have the equivalent of a 504 plan in Canada. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is not an education statute. It is a anti-discrimination legislation, and basically it says that you can't discriminate against someone for their disability. And students who don't quite qualify for an IEP in the United States often will come under 504. 504 remains after high school. The IDEA with the IEP does not. That ends when you graduate high school, but you still are entitled to accommodations if you self-report and provide documentation. The issue then becomes under 504, you have to understand what your needs are. You have to request those services. And the biggest stumbling block that I find is that because parents have been doing that advocacy work for their children all of those years, these kids can't articulate what their needs are. They're reluctant to do it. And what happens also is that the parents are legally not allowed to get information from the school like they were getting in high school. For instance, in the United States, there's federal legislation, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, where parents have an exclusive, unrestricted right to their children's educational records at school. Once your child becomes an adult and goes on to post-secondary, you are out of the loop as a parent. And a lot of parents are shocked to know that, especially since they're paying a lot of tuition for these colleges. I always recommend, as a proactive measure, for parents to have a conversation with your child that's about to go to college with a disability. Even if a child says, no, I want to do this myself, at least you know what you're dealing with. And one of the things that parents don't realize is that college is a whole different world, in the sense that high school is extremely highly structured, and college is, class attendance is optional. And so a lot of these kids will crash and burn, and they also don't get any feedback. In high school, you get a quiz every week or so. There's a marking period. A lot of college courses, maybe you'll get a midterm and a final. And these kids don't know how bad they're doing until it's too late. And so to have that conversation, and there's a form that your child can sign allowing you to be part of the loop, is very important. And another, you have to take it a step further. When they're in high school, you may get a phone call from the principal saying, Johnny's not doing so well. Is everything going on okay at home? Is there anything we need to know about? You don't get that call.
No.
When your child signs that FERPA release, all it does is allow the school to talk to you when you call them, but you still have to initiate that process. And that's very important for parents to understand.
And I think part of the reason why a lot of kids, even if they're higher functioning and with autism and have ADD, ADHD, a lot of them are fearful to have that diagnosis, because we all know a lot of bullying comes along with that as well. Now, what happens if, let's just say, your child is being bullied, and your child is being bullied, but your child's the one that gets in trouble for it because obviously the other one doesn't get caught, and it looks like your child is the one that's doing the bullying? What would you suggest to the families?
Well, what you have to do is you have to be very careful, because when I was young, the good thing about bullying was that it only took place during school hours for the most part. Now with social media, bullying can happen 24 hours a day. So if your child has a disability that involves their social interaction with other children or the administration, you have to be particularly vigilant of who they are getting into chat rooms with, what's going on. You really have to be very careful about monitoring, and also very careful about how there's two things that you need to do. One is to be very careful about how they may internalize bullying as victims of it, and make sure that there is someone that they can speak to. And it may not be you as the parent, but a therapist or someone that can really help them deal with those issues. And one of the reasons it's important is not just because how it may internalize themselves, but also kids with disabilities tend to strike back at a certain point, and like you said, they are the ones that might get caught in that circumstance. And how they react or respond, either in things they say or things that they do, can really impact them adversely. I represented, as an example, a child who was probably the most intelligent person I ever interacted with. He was a child who, we have public schools in New York City. There is one for each of our 5 boroughs that you have to take a special test. They're science-based schools, and you get a scholarship if you take the test. This kid found out about the test the day of the exam. He had Asperger's, and he actually got the highest grade in New York City. They put him in this program, but socially, he was so far behind the other kids that he had difficulty separating what the violence he would see in a video game from how you interact with people in real life. And he would commonly tell kids in the classroom that he was going to kill them and dismember them and all of these things because it's done without consequence in his video game. You have to be very careful as a parent because children with special needs don't react the same way to things they hear and things that they see and things that they interact with. And so you have to be very careful working with your child's therapist, what's appropriate for them, what's appropriate interaction with them, maybe engage in role playing. One of the things I say to parents is you will get, tutors for your child or, get them extra help to help them read the words on a page. But very little attention is paid to helping your child read a social situation.
Yeah.
And in many cases, not understanding those social cues become very problematic in terms of school discipline or to either attract bullying or being perceived inappropriately as a bully by what happens.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I deal with regularly a lot of people with Asperger's. And they're still finding they have a really big struggle with reading a social situation. What they may read it as is totally opposite. And they say, okay, Tina, how am I supposed to read it? And I explain to them, just sit back and watch. It either could be this or this. And I mean, they have learned with that, but they say, well, how do you know? And I says, a lot of the things take time. It's life. It's how you see things as life goes on, as the years go on. And they say, the one in particular says, well, how am I supposed to understand it without people looking at me sideways? Okay, why are you doing it this way? And why are you interpreting it this way? And I said, that all comes with sitting back and watching people's body language and how they say things. It's very important on how they say, not so much as what they say, but how they say it. They could say something that could be, like really happy. And you'd go, okay, they're really happy. No, they're not really happy. They're just saying it bubbly because they don't want to upset you. And, the one says to me, but I'm going to struggle with that. And I said, but a lot of us struggle with certain things. And that takes time to understand things. But that's where the struggle lies. And that's where a lot of them get into trouble.
One tip that I found is very helpful is that parents who have children that have problems with social interaction will typically request, and I have fought for, social skills training at school. And a lot of times parents, this is a little counterintuitive, but a lot of times parents will press for individualized social skills training. And I think it is crucial out of any other type of service that social skills training be a combination of individualized training and group work. And the reason is because that social skills training where a therapist or the school guidance counselor will sit with that child and explain about reading a social situation, it's abstract. In a group setting where they have group social skills training, other kids who are having similar issues can practice interacting with each other with that support. And I think that is as important as the individualized work. And so I don't think group work is the right solution. I don't think individual. I think it has to be a combination of both, where they get that information and they get to practice it in a very functional way.
Okay, so I want to ask you something because obviously, I mean, it's not just in Canada, the United States, it's all around the world. We know whether it be ADD, ADHD, or autism, we know our kids are at a higher risk of being disciplined at the school. Some are expelled from school, some are suspended from school, and some are removed by the police. If a student is suspended or kicked out of school because of their behaviors or arrested, what would you suggest to a family first on what they do? First steps.
Well, okay, first of all, what you're describing is happening far too frequently. And it's what I refer to as the perfect storm.
Yep.
As a parent, you get alarmed if the principal calls you and saying they're suspending your child. If a policeman calls you and says your child is being arrested, you're horrified. If you get both of those calls at the same time at the school, that the police are there and they're taking your child into custody for something they're being suspended for, it's a nightmare. Where do you turn? And that is also exaggerated by perhaps local press coverage,
Yeah.
people in the neighborhood talking about an incident that takes place. And that is a great concern. First of all, if you are working with a disability attorney, speak to them right away. If you have to go to the school, have them come there with you. There's a very important thing that parents need to know. If the police are active at the school because of something involving your child, okay, parents typically make two major mistakes. When they get to the school, they will either discipline their child in front of the principal to make it look as if this is not a reflection on me and we don't teach this at home, etc., or they will fight to the death to protect their child in that situation. Neither is a good strategy. What you need to do is take your child by the arm and get your child out of the line of fire. Get them out of there. Nothing you say or do at that moment is going to unsuspend them. Okay? Don't worry about risking problems with get them out of there, get them home, and sort it out from there. If the police are going to arrest them, there's nothing you can do. You should be very clear that your child is not going to speak to anyone. And I have been in situations, I also think that there are far too few attorneys that practice criminal defense and special education. There's maybe 10 of us in the United States, okay? And so I have the unique ability to represent a child in both family court as well as in school. And I have been in situations where I've stood between my child and a principal and said, you're not questioning my client anymore. And the principal saying, but under the law, I have the right to question one of my students. Well, unless they're arresting him, I'm walking him out the door, okay? He's not going to get into any more trouble. He's in a lot of trouble as it is, okay? Get them out of there. Let, cool heads prevail. Let the situation destabilize. And that's another important thing that I think parents really need to know about. With the onslaught of school shootings over the last 5 to 10 years, there has been an increased police presence on all school grounds. And it's there to protect the children. It should be there to protect the children. But school resource officers, as they're referred to in the United States, or many schools employ off-duty police officers as security guards in the school. This raises a number of constitutional issues and also blurs the line between police activity and school activity. It's very important that most of the school resource officer organizations believe that school resource officers should have crisis intervention training to de-escalate these issues as they arise, okay? But it's in the United States, there's no formal legislation requiring it, and we have been pushing for it for years. Another key issue is that school resource officers or police officers stationed in a school should be there for the students' safety. They should not be enforcing the school code of conduct.
Right.
That's what happens. If a teacher loses control of a situation in the classroom, he should not be calling the police officer into the room to physically remove that kid for one reason, okay? I'm not saying what that child is doing is right, okay? And this is probably one of the most important things that parents should take away from this tonight. And that is when it comes to behavior and your child with disability, when you are trying to advocate for them, it is never a good idea, and there is always a perception of the school that you are making excuses for antisocial behavior because of your child's disability. That is not what you should be doing. What you should be doing is making the school understand that your child is doing this because of their disability. It doesn't make it right. The conduct is wrong, but we have to understand why this is happening so we can do something to prevent it from happening tomorrow. that is really the goal, because it's in the school's best interest to do that as well. In the United States, if your child has a disability and they're suspended for more than 10 days within a calendar school year, you have a right to a superintendent's hearing. And the hearing is broken up into two halves. The first half is whether or not they did what they're accused of, and they always did, so that's not the issue. The second half is what the appropriate punishment should be. But for kids with disabilities, there's another thing that happens in between those two, and that is the IEP team has to meet and decide whether or not the conduct was a manifestation of the child's disability. And if it was, a child can't be disciplined for more than 10 days during that year. There's an exception for things involving weapons, drugs, or serious injuries, up to 45 school days. But a child can't be disciplined more than that because of their disability, and that's important. And the school is required to do a functional behavioral assessment of the child and interpose a behavioral intervention plan. Because, Tina, you know as well as I do that once a child with a behavioral disability gets to a certain point in their tantrum or whatever you call what's happening, you can't bring them back. The key is to identify those triggers before they happen and redirect them, which is really one of the keys of applied behavioral analysis, is to really understand how this child approaches situations, to proactively see those bumps in the road to make sure they don't hit them, or to minimize them to a certain degree.
Well, and that's what we all hope as parents. We all hope that regardless of the setting in school, we would hope that somebody would see those triggers that are escalating a situation, that they can reel them back in before it gets beyond that point where you cannot calm them back down. So my question to you is, what could a parent do if their child is beyond that point where the escalation has risen to the point where the police are called in? What are the parents' next recourse? Because obviously the police are called and police are taking them. How do you deal with the police to de-escalate the situation, that they don't make the situation even worse than what it is by escalating the behavior with the one with the special needs?
Correct. What I would say is it's very important to get your clinician involved with your attorney, and make sure that the police understand that this child reacts, and their reactions to whatever you do can be magnified. We don't want that. You don't want that. You have to understand what's going on. Here is the number for my psychiatrist, my psychologist, their behavioral therapist, to help you understand how this can be addressed without making it worse for you or for my child or for anyone. Okay, that is very important. And that is something that before there's an issue where the police are taking your child away, you should try to incorporate into the IEP so that the school understands that behaviors can be escalated. And with respect to certain children, if a child, for instance, has oppositional defiant disorder, okay, those behaviors can escalate at an exponential rate, okay, based upon, and what you would think that the school would say, you know, this is going to make things worse, but they don't. A lot of times, school superintendents, principals, they just want order in their schools, and they just want to make sure everybody is safe. And they're not the most judicious people in the world. And I'll say this, I have been to a number of manifestation hearings, and it is rare to actually get a finding of manifestation without having to go above the school's head and request an impartial hearing by an impartial hearing officer. Because my experience has been the word manifestation is like a dirty word that sticks in the throat of principals, because they can't get away from the thought that this kid's getting a benefit because they have a disability, or they're using it as an excuse to be bad. And you really have to break that mindset.
So I'm going to ask you, when a student, and I mean, it's rare, but there are quite a few of them, has a dual diagnosis, as in ADHD and autism or ADD and autism. Obviously, being a dual diagnosis is hard as it is. But when you're in the school system and you have that dual diagnosis, it's hard to get those services outside of school because they'll say, well, it's the ADD will say it's the autism doing it. The autism will say, no, it's the ADD doing it. So when it comes to a school setting, obviously you're going to have issues that can be combined with both diagnoses. How does the school define which diagnosis is doing it, and does it matter when it comes to
Well,
doing up an IEP? Obviously, you have to have both diagnoses in there.
it matters and it doesn't matter. It matters in the short run because the school is the one that's dealing with your child on a day-to-day basis. But if you believe that the school is either not looking at both or favoring one over the other and it's negatively impacting your child, parents need to know that that the school is not the last word in this.
Right.
In the United States, there is an administrative process. You can file for an impartial hearing and go over the school's head and say the school is wrong here. And it's unfortunate because most parents fall into two categories. Either they just assume educators know what they're doing, or they've been burned by the school and they don't even want to talk anymore. They just want to sue everybody.
Yeah.
And neither one of them is a really good advocate. I would say that it's funny because you have to think about something in terms of psychology. Schools, especially elementary, middle schools, high schools, they are in charge during the day. They march those kids around. In fact, a school, a K to 12 setting is probably the closest thing to a prison that there is in life. Okay. The bell rings, these kids go here, you do what we tell you. That carries over into the conversations with parents. And as an example, years ago, before the statute in the United States, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that provides for IEPs, did not, you have to be classified for special education. And ADHD was traditionally not a qualifying disability under IDEA. And so it is now. And so what would happen would be the kids who didn't qualify for an IEP would get this 504 plan, okay? And even today, now the law was changed in 1997, okay? But even today, I get emails all the time from parents who say, my school district says my child with ADHD is not entitled to an IEP. Okay, they have to get a 504 plan. That is not the law. That is school district policy, and you can challenge it. And it's very important that you need to know that you have the ability to do that and what that process is.
You can challenge anything. I mean, as I tell parents, as you said in the beginning of this interview, parents are the ones that fight for their child, and they can fight almost anything. Whether they'll win or not is one thing, but they can fight almost anything. And if you can get the school on your side to show them, as I did with my son, you know, they didn't want a lot of things being done in the school, but I said, okay, let me show you by me modifying his IEP. I've done my son's IEPs up almost every single year. I modified his program every single year. I started at home and I'd implement it into the school. Why? Well, you know what? Back then, it was hard to get people to be on your side. So if I can get my son to be happy going to school by, you know, working things out at home and then implementing them into school, I do it. So, you know what? It is a struggle. Parents have to obviously advocate for everything. Back then, you know, it wasn't heard of having a child with a special needs in an inclusive classroom. My son was inclusive from public school all through high school. Now, Robert, I have a question here for you. Paul wants to know, what is the maximum age for special needs students to stay in the school system?
Well, in the United States, the way it works is for an IEP, you have those rights and those protections until either you graduate from high school or you turn 21 years old, whichever comes first. So basically, if your child is, for instance, developmentally disabled and they can't graduate from school, you can continue to get services for them up until they're 21 years old. So it really depends on what your needs are. But I would caution you to be very proactive. Let's say your child is 15 or 16. You have until they're 21. What happens the day they turn 21? Do you have a guardianship in place? Are there adult services programs that you are looking towards? Don't wait until the last minute. Have these things, these transitions as smooth as you can, because children on the spectrum, children with ADHD, any kid with a disability really does not do very well with transitions. And so you want to anticipate these bumps in the road ahead of time. The one thing I say to parents is, I got a law degree when I went to law school. I didn't get a magic wand. So nothing I say here today is going to, make all of your problems go away. But what it may do is be the difference between navigating a minefield with a map in your hand versus being chased through one blindfolded. Okay, that's a big difference. Okay, you know what's out there, you could start to prepare for it.
Exactly. Now, there's one important question that probably in the last 4 years, a lot of parents had no idea. And I'm hoping the people that see this afterwards that, aren't being able to see it today will understand this. A lot of parents don't understand that when their child turns 18, they have to go and get guardianship of their child. A lot of parents don't know that. There's a lot of lawyers. It's hard to find a lawyer to help you get guardianship of your child. A lot of parents don't know. What are the steps that a parent would do, and how far in advance should they start getting guardianship?
I would say if your child has a significant developmental disability that they are going to need your assistance. If your child has ADHD and they need services, it's not an important issue at all. And they probably would push back against it. But if your child could not survive out in the real world without you or someone like you, protecting them, guiding them, doing things for them, I would say when they start to turn 15 or so, 14, 15, I would start thinking about it maybe, even earlier than that, but really starting to look, because even in the United States, it's very different from state to state.
Yeah.
New York State, where I practice, for instance, has in the last maybe 15 years or so developed a specific guardianship for people with disabilities, as opposed to a traditional guardianship of an elderly person in a nursing home or something like that. And it's a much more streamlined process. Now, typically the way it works is you petition the court to be appointed as your child's guardian as an adult. And what will happen is you will be required to file that petition along with reports from your child's care providers, psychiatrists, psychologists, and what should be included in there are the services that they need to get, their ability to interact with the general public and how that is inhibited. And typically what the court will do is the court will appoint a lawyer to represent the interests of your child in this proceeding, okay? And they will review these things to make sure that your child is not a millionaire and you're stealing their money or something like that. And they'll review these paperwork. And typically, in a situation where a child is developmentally disabled, it is pretty pro forma, in the sense that the law guardian that's appointed will try to meet with your son or daughter. They will review the reports. They will speak to the doctors if necessary, and they'll issue their own report to the court. There's paperwork involved. You could be talking about a 3 to 6 month process. Another relative could challenge it. This becomes an issue when there is a divorce and there's a custody issue, or one parent in the domestic issue is in denial about the disability or in disagreement about the services that are necessary. If you get a challenge to that guardianship, the process would obviously be longer. It may involve testimony, a hearing in front of the judge, but for the most part, the courts really have tried to streamline that process. So you should try to take advantage of it.
So I've read here in Ontario that they test the student or the child, adult, your child, they test them to make sure that they're not capable of being able to do things on their own. Is that something that you've been accustomed to, or is it
In
just
some
paperwork?
jurisdictions, the court will appoint a panel. They have a panel of doctors, and they will require their own evaluation. Depending on whether or not the evaluations you provide in your petition are clear enough, are thorough enough, they may want more. Certainly, they have the ability to do it. In some jurisdictions, they always do it. For the most part, if things are clear and uncontested, if your evaluations are thorough enough, they should be fine. Now, one thing that's really important, parents get evaluations of their children all the time. They request them from the school. Sometimes you get them privately, okay? They're expensive when you get them privately. And a lot of times you pay all this money and you get this, 30-page full evaluation. And a lot of times parents will get it. They'll flip through to the summary and they'll say, okay, so, my child is really disabled and I can ask for these services. Take the time to read through those evaluations. And for me, as an attorney or an advocate, I would say it's crucial to understand the sub-testing that's being done, because I really consider that as a blueprint for the IEP or 504 plan. It tells me what I'm asking for, not because the parents want it, because a doctor said it's necessary. It's like a prescription for the services and support that you need, especially in a guardianship situation. You want to make it very clear that because of these significant deficits, you need to be appointed as the guardian. That is very important.
Okay, so why should parents go for guardianship? Let's just say the way things are right now. Doctors still talk to them and get their input, not your child's. Hospitals still contact you and you still give all the information, no matter where it is, banking, whatever it has to be. You still are the one in charge, but you don't have guardianship. Why should
Well,
somebody get guardianship?
you should absolutely get guardianship because there may be programs that your child is entitled to from the state, from the federal government, in terms of group homes, resources, jobs programs, also in terms of your ability to address their medical needs, okay? Their prescription, their doctor's care, tests that they need. Your child is 23 years old, but functionally can't communicate. Okay, you think your child needs to get a physical or a certain type of test. Someone needs to sign the consent forms on behalf of your child. You could be, in a sense, withholding medical treatment from your child because as an adult, they can't consent to it. That is significant.
But Robert,
if for nothing else, that's important.
What parents think, and this is what scares me, a lot of parents are still under the assumption, my child has a diagnosis, my child is special needs, my child is still needing the parents. I still have a right to make all the decisions because they have a diagnosis, they're special needs. Parents don't understand that's not the case. When they turn 18 years old, you don't have that legal right anymore.
That is correct. That was similar to what I was saying before about the situation with them going to college. You have to actually do something legally so that the school will talk to you and let you be a part of their education, because legally they're considered the adult. So it's very important that you take that step. And, what if your child loses consciousness and you rush them to the hospital? It's very important, if you need to put services, support, a ventilator, especially now in a situation where, we are under fire with respect to COVID.
Yeah.
You don't want any limitations or hesitation about services, testing, medical treatment, any of those things.
Okay, but what if, and I'm coming at you with everything right now. What if You've been given that right to make all those decisions in the bank, in the hospital, everywhere. What if something comes up? How do you prove that, hey, I've been given all these decisions, nobody's ever questioned me, now all of a sudden I need to have guardianship? Can you prove
Well,
that you've
the
had those
fact,
rights?
well, you had those rights when your child was a minor.
No, after
But when
18.
if they're after 18 and it somehow got by and no one questioned it,
Right.
then I can't conceive of a situation in a hospital setting, for instance, where something like that would fly. If it was an emergency situation, they might look to next of kin or something. But what if you have an adult female who is developmentally disabled and you need to make sure she gets her mammogram?
Yeah.
Okay, that is a standardized medical procedure that someone needs. It's not an emergency. Those types of things, I would be very hard pressed to find a doctor that would perform them without seeing guardianship, a power of attorney, or some type of legal authorization to protect themselves. That you are the person that's entitled to do these procedures, to authorize these procedures.
And you know what? And that's why I like what we're doing tonight, because it's perfect. Whether it's in the States, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Canada, a lot of this things stand true in any country. They may vary a little bit, but they still stand true. Now, Jen, thank you so much. I'm assuming Jen's one of your friends, Jen Cho. She's thanking us for interviewing you regarding the information that we're talking about today, which it is very, very important. Robert and I have talked for many years about hoping to get Robert up here to do a seminar, and we feel that this is the way it has to come for us to be able to do something together to educate the public on the rights of your loved one, whether it be anywhere in the world, how to get guardianship, how to look out for your loved one in the school setting, whether it be public school, high school, how to deal with de-escalation of a situation with the police or with the school. The bullying online, which, Robert, is a huge thing right now, huge. I'm seeing so much of it right now on Twitter. I'm seeing a lot of the bullying going on. Is there anything that you can add to that? Because obviously we don't want to see it go to the next step.
It's problematic because in some ways, a child who is has a greater impairment may work with you, or kind of sit still for a parent kind of modifying or moderating their presence online, etc. But kids, especially kids with ADHD or kids with ODD, will push back hard, and it's difficult. And what kids don't understand, I look at school discipline and arrests in cycles. Okay, what am I getting called about? What are the issues right now? For the longest time, it was bullying. And then it kind of started to wade into kids posting inappropriate content about themselves. A girl sending a topless picture to her boyfriend, a boy sending a picture of himself to his girlfriend or something like that. Then almost all of that was eclipsed by vaping.
Yeah.
I was getting a lot of calls about vaping issues. Now with remote learning, everything is online. The kids aren't in school with each other. They're not getting caught doing what they're not supposed to be doing in school because there is no school. But kids are living in a virtual world now exclusively because of COVID. And so there is much more that is necessary in terms of moderation, being careful. I used to show a slide that had 3 kind of thuggish teenagers, and it said the internet doesn't make you stupid, but it just exposes your stupidity to the rest of the world. And kids don't understand that their phone is the same thing as a computer, and nothing gets erased. So everything is there for everyone to see, and it can always jump up to bite you.
Yep.
And I spend a lot of time, okay, going to schools to educate kids, to tell them, you know, would you have a problem if your principal just picked up your phone and started going through it? They all would. They're horrified. That can happen. Okay. So anything you put in the cyber world exists somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it can affect your getting into college. It could affect your getting arrested. It could affect your getting expelled or suspended or whatever. So it's very, very, very important that you know what the consequences are. And that in and of itself is not enough, because kids with ADHD, for example, have a neurological disorder that impairs their ability to control their impulses. Doesn't make what they do right. It's not an excuse. What they did was wrong, but it's a natural progression to what happens, even if they know there are consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is what parents get so frustrated about. It's very difficult.
Yeah, they know the consequences, but they don't know them, as in they don't know the extent of them. And that's the same thing with autism as well. They know there's consequences, but they don't grasp the idea of how bad those consequences could be. Like, and I'm assuming that you've been watching the media of the court case going on right now, of the person that's on the spectrum, that ran down those people and killed them. Now they're trying to say he did that and didn't understand it because of his autism, and you know, that's where there's going to be an issue, because he said if he could do it, he'd do it again. So is that his mental state, or is that the autism? And that's where there's going to be a hard part, because if they're going to start bringing to light that it's the autism that made him do it, well, no, autism doesn't make you do things like that. Now, there's one thing I want to ask you about that we didn't touch on. This is going to be a tough one. There's a lot of issues that I've been dealing with families, with sexuality. Because of a diagnosis, I think it gets taken a lot further when somebody's touched, whether it be inappropriate or just touched, and the other person gets offended by it, and there's charges brought, or the student gets taken away, or they say something. Now, have you found that it's escalated because of the diagnosis? And if it wasn't a diagnosis, it wouldn't be escalated that much?
It's hard to say, because what I think people don't understand is that they see that numbers of diagnosis of ADHD increasing over the last number of years, or autism numbers increasing. And, you know, well, so many people are being diagnosed now. My position is we are now understanding how significant these impairments are, and how they were misunderstood in the past. And we're actually seeing clearly now how many children actually need assistance or have an impairment. Okay. But in terms of the diagnosis, I mean, if I'm understanding your question correctly, do I think the diagnosis impairs people's understanding because of these types of situations?
Actually, what I'm asking you is, because of their diagnosis, and let's say they've hugged somebody, just hugged them because they wanted to hug them, and that person's parents called the police to have him arrested or her arrested, whichever, and they got arrested because they hugged somebody. Do you find with situations like that that a lot of special needs are getting charged for inappropriate touching, as in a hug, because of their diagnosis?
No, I don't think it's because of their diagnosis. That I can say. Okay. I think what happens is it really depends on the level of impairment for that person. I think if a kid has ADHD and has significant impulse control problems, and also kids with ADHD, I mean, there's a whole long presentation I do on this about the need to gravitate towards high STEM activity. kids got ADHD. I've represented a number of kids who have gotten very friendly
Yeah.
sexually with other kids. I think that it is difficult, but to explain to a court that the disability, it's wrong. What they did was wrong, but it's difficult for them to control their impulses. Does that mean it's okay? No, but what do? Do we punish this child, or do we get them services or perhaps interactive training to understand the limitations that you need to have and how you touch somebody, how close you get to somebody, etc.? That is what's necessary. When it comes to a child on the spectrum, especially if there is a significant impairment, I think it's easier for a court to understand that this child or this adolescent is expressing affection the only way they know how. It's not about how they could, it's really not understanding what's going on here, as opposed to a kid who says, I think, a girl who thinks that boy is attractive, or that boy who thinks that girl is attractive, and I'm just going to touch him. I can't stop myself. It's not supposed to be doing that, but you just can't stop yourself. That's different from a kid. Just, when my parents show they have affection for me, they hug me. So I met a stranger and they were nice, so I hugged them in a stranger setting. I think you have a situation where it would be hard pressed to really prosecute a kid under those circumstances, or very easy to defend based upon their disability.
And yet it's being done. And yet it is being done.
It does happen.
Yeah.
It does happen an awful lot. And we are in a much more hyper-vigilant environment now, where things that were, that's just what kids do, is not, acceptable anymore. Or, somebody said something and I'm just going to stay away from that person. Things are offensive. One of the things that I find in terms of reading a social situation, what we talked about before, is that for younger kids, they don't understand about, the limitations on how close you're supposed to get to somebody else, that personal space distance. And if that's not addressed at a very young age, that child's going to have increased problems as they get older and as they start, developing through adolescence and go through puberty. And really those boundaries, those safe boundaries and respect for them have to be addressed throughout their the services they get, the support that they get through doctors, through therapists, through their parents at home, etc.
What I tell parents a lot of times when parents would call me and say, I don't know what to do, my son's hugging or my daughter's hugging people. Well, as I did when my son hit, I think it was 6 years old, I started teaching him, nope, you only hug mommy and daddy. You high five, you props, you elbow with everybody else. And a lot of them would say, well, he's so cute, I want to hug him. No, I have to address this now, and he has to be taught this now so that he doesn't do it when he gets older. And you know what, as hard as it is, I mean, typical people, yes, they will do it because they know when to do it. My son just loved hugging people, but you know what? It got to the point where it was easy enough to teach him. And that's what I try and tell parents. As much as they're cute and they're cuddly, and it's okay for them to hug when they're little, those kids get older, and you have to teach them when they're younger that as much as it's cute and cuddly to see it when they're younger, when they get older, it's going to be harder to show them that even though you were younger and you did it, you can't do it when you're older. It's just not appropriate because you get in trouble for it. Now, I have a question from Jen to you. I'm aware that for the university and college, students with learning disabilities have access to laptops, extension time for exams, and extra days for assignments. What other services may the adult students access?
Well, a lot of it depends on what their needs are. Sometimes, there are a range of services. One of the benefits of college is that there's typically a disability office that has a host of services. And if you register with that office and provide information, your documentation, they will have, you may be able to get pre-printed notes.
Yep.
You may be able to get a note taker. You may be able to get someone to read the questions to you for the exam. The problem that we find in a post-secondary situation is that the the DSS office, or the Disability Student Services Office, as they're called, gets funded, and the more kids that come in, the more funding they get. So
Yeah.
they're actually very accommodating. The problem is, especially on a college campus, is there is often a huge disconnect between what services or accommodations the DSS office says you can have versus what some teacher that's been tenured and been teaching this way for 30 years, everybody's got to hand their reports in at the same time in my classroom. And bridging that gap can be very, very difficult sometimes. And that's something that parents need to be aware of.
But that's like what we spoke about in the very beginning. When they go to college and university, you can still have things put in place. If they have your diagnosis on file in the OSR file, you can still get, like you said, somebody to read those for you, somebody to transcribe for you, get the extra modifications done for you. You can ask for extenuating time to have those tests, subjects, whatever it might be. You can ask for extra time for that. As long as you have a meeting with the school, with the resource, with the special ed at the university, the college, and let them know that you'd like to have modifications in some of the things. You don't want it fully modified, obviously, because as time's gone on, you learn how to adapt to certain things. But there should be things put in place as long as they have your diagnosis on file. As you said, you can get somebody to note take for you. You can get somebody to read it for you. And I think that's what Jen's asking for. There are extra things for adults to access with other services. Agreed?
Correct.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, Robert, is there anything that we haven't spoke about that you'd like to address that I haven't asked you questions about?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there is, because this, I could go on for days talking about this. But we tried to cover a lot tonight. I think we got some really good questions. And I really have to say, Tina, it's been a long time that you and I have been trying to put together some type of programming. The benefit of this situation that we're in is we're doing things a lot more virtual, so we're able to do this now. And I really appreciate the fact that you're giving me a forum to reach out to parents, either in Canada or in other places, because the issues, just like you've been saying, regardless of what country it's in, regardless of what disability it is, you really need to understand your child's needs. You really need to understand the process, and you have to be vigilant and really, make a difference.
And I'll tell parents now, don't ever give up, ever. It might be a struggle. You might be really tired with the advocating that you have to do. Don't give up. You know what? I was advocating till my son graduated from school. So, I mean, every year I advocated. Obviously, it got a lot easier. And as I stated earlier, because of my, let's say, my, tenacity, the superintendent of the school board where our foundation is home based, he hired me on as a consultant to be on the parent side. As long as I was hired on to be on the parent side and the student, more or less the student side, I would do it. I wasn't advocating for the school board. I was advocating always for the student. It's a tough road. Nobody says raising a kid's going to be easy, and with a diagnosis, obviously it's a lot harder, but you know what? The benefits outweigh everything in the end. They told me my son would never go to school. Well, obviously that's something that I've never accepted no very easily, and I proved them wrong. He was inclusive in a classroom. Mind you, that he did have withdrawals from the classroom, and that's something that I made mandatory in his IEP, because I didn't want behaviors to arise. So as soon as they seen something happening, they knew that they were to withdraw him out of the classroom for 10 minutes to allow him a break and then come back. I modified his program, as in giving him extra time, or less questions. I had visuals, instead of him doing, let's just say volcanoes. Okay, you have to do paperwork on volcanoes. Well, a lot of his was visual, and that's what a lot of parents need to understand. Modifications don't need just words. Modifications you can do, whether it be public school, high school, university. You can have visuals to help you, with the body, so my son would understand more. I traced his body so he could see how the body system worked, and it was a lot easier for him. With a volcano, I did a volcano. Those are the things that we helped, and that's what parents need to understand, that modifications just aren't words. You can use modifications in every area, whether it be length of time, whether it be less of the assignment, whether it be visuals instead of all words. Modifications can be anything that's going to help your child learn in school and make things a lot easier, not just on your child, but on the school as well. Because make your son happy, make the school happy, make the classroom happy, right?
I agree, absolutely.
What's that? Yeah, sorry, Paul's telling me to mention something. Even woodshop with my son Nathan, they thought, oh, he's got autism, he's got a diagnosis, I don't know if he could do woodshop. Modify it.
I know we've kind of gone on in terms of time, but there's a story I want to tell, a quick story to kind of give an example of this. I was doing a workshop one night at parent training, and as I was saying before, a lot of times this comes down to money.
Yep.
And what the school district can afford to do, how judicious they have to be with their budget. And so what I was doing was trying to get parents to come up with as many accommodations or services that would cost little or no money, and to kind of take away the word no from the school. And this one mom raised her hand in the back of the room, and she said, my son has ADHD, and I just want to share this story. He plays hockey, and during hockey season, I would notice his grades were so much better, and the disciplinary reports or the letters I used to get would always drop off during hockey season. He was more disciplined and everything. And I was sitting in his 504 meeting, and everybody was talking about services and what can we do about this. And she told him about the hockey. And she said, I have an idea. He gets gym twice a week. Can you give him gym 5 days a week? And they kind of looked at each other and they said, sure, let's try it. And she said it made such a difference in her son. And I think I tell that story a lot for two reasons. Number one, I thought it was a great example of something you can do. But that was a mom who knew her son. She understood what he would react to and what would make a difference for him. And she tried it and it worked. And that's really where you have to be. You have to educate yourself, not about their disability, but how their disability symptomizes, how it comes out of them.
And how you can incorporate that into the school. I mean,
Yes.
Like I was saying, my son was inclusive in the classroom with breaks. Okay. I asked them to give him 3 breaks throughout the day, whether it's withdrawn from the classroom or give him something Thomas, the tank engine, to do. So I would get word searches with Thomas words in it. I would get pictures for him to color. That would be his downtime for him to gather his thoughts, for him to calm down, and then it calmed him down enough that he could get back into doing schoolwork again. And that's something that, as long as you can incorporate things and work it out with the schools. I mean, obviously, talk to the school. I mean, a lot of parents, we get frustrated because, sometimes we're not heard. But if you can get them to understand that incorporating some of the things that, given that little period of time to calm your child down, it would be so much healthier on your child, on the classroom, and on the teacher. And that's something that needs to be understood, that if you could come collectively with the school when you're having your meetings and tell them about it, then everybody would be happy. And then, they could find that this could be incorporated into the next year with another student. I mean, I used to have a thing called Nathan's Day. So they would tell me they don't have enough time to write up what's going on with Nathan throughout the day, which they had to do every day because that's something I went to the school board for, because I wanted to know how he was doing. So, at 9 o'clock, he did this. At 10 o'clock, he did this. But I used to have pictures. He would show up math. And then the EA would tell me how he did so that I could communicate with him when he got home. And then I would be able to tell by the way I was communicating with him, his body language or his reaction, whether or not he had a good time in that classroom. And then I could talk to the teacher of that classroom. and then we could find out what was going on. And that's something that, you know, just having that little thing that they did incorporate for years into the school, but they put other students' names on. And you know what? As the years went on, it went from pictures to words, and then it went down to the bottom of the page. So it helped the student as well, because they'd read it and it helped them to learn. So, I mean, like, that's even a modification that would help them, and it helped the school as well. So
That is correct.
so anyways, Robert, I'm going to wrap this up. I thought this was excellent, and I think it's something really good that I'm hoping that, as we've both said many times throughout this interview, it doesn't matter what country you are in. A lot of the information that was presented tonight works in every country. The modifications that we spoke about works in every country. You know, it's going to be something that's very helpful, and I appreciate all of this information that you've given out to everybody, and I appreciate the time that you've given me, Robert, to do this interview with you tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you again, Robert, and it was nice having you. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.